Eid Al-Fitr is one of the most important holidays for Muslims. It is celebrated at the end of a month-long fasting period. And Muslims gather together to eat, to pray, to commemorate and thank God for their blessings. Yet in some years, the day of Eid falls on 2 different days and can become disputed. Why is this the case? Why is the day of Eid not like Christmas on a fixed date? This year, will the Ummah celebrate Eid on a single day? Well, astronomical projections are suggesting that the sightability of the moon is going to cause there to be a chance that the day of Eid will fall on 2 different days. So, why does that occur? Well, to find out, we have to go back to the basics. Let's begin by trying to understand why Islam utilizes the lunar calendar. Certain aspects of Islam, particularly its practice, depend on the lunar calendar. So for example, the daily prayers depends on the sun. When it rises, its position during the day, then when it sets, and the beginning of nighttime. In a similar fashion, the month of Ramadan and fasting depends on sighting of the moon and the lunar calendar. So when it is sighted, marks the beginning of the lunar month and the advent of the fasting period, and then when it ends as well. This also applies to the Hajj pilgrimage. In fact, in the Holy Quran, in chapter 2, verse 189, God declares, speaking through Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that when the people ask about the phases of the moon, that to tell them that it indicates the phases of time and the pilgrimage season. This marks the beginning of the month and the end of the month, and in fact establishes the days on which certain practices need to take place. So is there a role for science in the process? Well, Islam teaches us that there is a specific part of science that can be applied to our practice of religion. And if this is the case, then why can't science be used to determine the beginning of a lunar month? Well, according to Islamic law, the Sharia, the beginning of a lunar month has to be established by the sighting of the new crescent moon, particularly with the naked eye. However, the astronomical new moon, the birth of the new moon, is invisible to the eye. This is because the sun, the moon, and the earth line up such that the side of the moon that is facing the earth is completely dark and cannot be seen. It rises with the sun, it sets with the sun, and hence cannot be viewed or is not visible to the naked eye. On the other hand, Islamic law states that to establish the first day of the new lunar month, the crescent has to be sighted with the naked eye. There is a certain practicality to this, because not everyone has access to scientific tools or the ability to calculate when that moon is going to appear or not. This makes the law usable and practical and feasible for people of any kind in any background. Islam determines that the start of the lunar month has to be established based on certainty, yaqeen, or contentment, al-Itmi'nan. This is done when a person actually sees the crescent moon or knows that it has been seen with the naked eye. On the other hand, astronomy uses precise calculations to determine the birth of the moon, which we already stated is invisible to the naked eye. In this way, Islamic law ensures that the person has witnessed the crescent moon, marking the beginning of the lunar calendar, and more importantly, that no expertise is required to do so, hence instilling within the person certainty and contentment. So when considering Islam and the science of astronomy, it's not to say that astronomy is wrong. No, it's a science that's based on data and information. Indeed, the lunar calendar suggests that the month is 29 days long and approximately 12 additional hours. But there are variations in astronomical calculations that prevent a person from establishing certainty. One is due to the time period of sighting the crescent moon. Some projections, some astronomical calculations, suggest that it is approximately 7 hours, some 8 to 20 hours, and some 24 hours after the birth of the new moon. The second is how long the crescent remains above the horizon, with some projections suggesting that's 40 minutes, some down to 4 minutes, and some even a little bit longer. And then finally, the issue of its altitude, what degree at which it can be sighted at, with some astronomical calculations suggesting it's 8 and others at different numbers. With all of these variations, even though they're calculations based in science, one cannot establish certainty or contentment that the moon was actually sighted or visible. That's why Islamic law requires that the start of the lunar month, and hence the establishment of religious practices that are obligation, depends on sighting with the naked eye, because this is the only way in which certainty and contentment can be determined and established in the heart of the person. The Gregorian calendar is based on the sun, the solar cycle. So we know that it's going to be 12 months long, 365 days. On the other hand, the lunar calendar, each of its months, as we just said, are approximately 29 days and some 12 hours and maybe a few minutes added on to that, which suggests that each lunar year will be approximately 11 days shorter than the Gregorian year, than the solar year. So, if this year we have Eid Al-Fitr on a particular day, then next year Eid Al-Fitr will be 11 days earlier. Hence, it's not going to be on a fixed date. This explains why it moves constantly from year to year. So Eid Al-Fitr is going to be determined by sighting the crescent moon. This is important because every day, every ritual thereafter is going to be determined based on that. Now, astronomically speaking, looking at the calculations, we know that the data is going to point to the birth of the new moon. This is the phase of what is called conjunction, when the earth, the moon, and the sun are lined up and the moon is completely dark. After this phase, astronomically speaking, the moon enters into what is called the waxing phase, which is the first instant in which it is visible. So a person, when they want to determine the Islamic lunar month's beginning, they will either look for that waxing crescent moon and sight it, or, having completed 30 days of the current month, know that the next month has begun. This is important because various opinions exist on how to establish that first day. Most jurists agree that sighting of the moon must occur with the naked eye, and that you cannot use an optical aid to do so. However, once a person sights the moon with the naked eye, then they don't have to rely on any jurisprudential ruling or announcement of any kind to establish the first day of the lunar month. Hence, if it is the month of Ramadan, then they must begin fasting the next day. However, there are variations in the juristic rulings based on geographical location and the sighting of the moon. These basically fall into one of three different opinions. The first opinion is that if the crescent moon is sighted in a given city, then it applies for the entire world. So for example, if the crescent moon is seen in Houston, then the entire world can rely on that sighting and the Eid Al-Fitr is celebrated. The second opinion relies on what is called the unity of horizons, which states that if two cities share a night, then a confirmed sighting in the first city establishes the start of the next lunar month in the other. So for example, if there is a confirmed sighting in New York City, then because it shares a night with London, both cities will start the lunar month. The third opinion relies on something called multiplicity of horizons, which suggests that each land has its own horizon, and that a confirmed sighting in a given land or in a given horizon does not automatically establish the start of the lunar month in another land or in another horizon. This is going to be determined by the size and the altitude of the crescent moon. In terms of multiplicity of horizons, and what is the opinion of Sayyid al-Sistani, A confirmed sighting in a given area, in a given land, can be used to prove sighting in another land or in another horizon if the size and altitude of the crescent moon in that subsequent land matches or is bigger or greater than the land in which the moon was sighted. Two areas are considered to have the same horizon if sighting of the crescent moon with the naked eye in the first horizon guarantees that it will be sighted in the second. This is based on the fact that the second area, the crescent moon, will have the same or more prominent features than the crescent moon in the area where it was actually sighted, in terms of size, in terms of altitude above the horizon, and in terms of angular distance from the sun. This is where astronomical calculations can provide that information, and hence establish the connection between these two lands. If sighting of the crescent moon has been confirmed by the naked eye in a given area, and astronomical calculations suggest and show that a second area will have a crescent moon that is similar in its luminosity, altitude above the horizon, and angular distance to the sun as the first area, then one can have contentment that there is a relationship between the first and second areas, such that sighting in that first area guarantees sighting in the second area. However, if astronomical calculations indicate that a second area, that the crescent moon will be smaller, have less luminosity, not as great of an altitude above the horizon such that it is sightable when it is compared to the confirmed sighting in the first area, then contentment cannot be achieved, and hence the confirmed sighting in the first area cannot be applied to the second one. It's important to be respectful of the practices of others within the bounds of Islam. This is because those practices are based on jurisprudential rulings, and those jurisprudential rulings depend on the Holy Quran, the Sunnah of the Ahl al-Bayt, and other means. And each jurist derives his own rulings and has his own opinions. As far as Sayyid al-Sistani is concerned, it's apparent that this year there may be two Eid Al-Fitr. This is because a confirmed sighting in a certain area may not establish it for another, particularly being the case because North America is very big. Or it could be that the crescent moon is not sighted at all, which would mean that 30 days would have to elapse for then the next month to start and be confirmed. In the event that there are two Eid al-Fitrs, we would like to give you some advice. Number one, don't rely on rumors. Instead, refer to the office of your jurist, the one you emulate, or take the word of his authorized representative, or refer to a committee of scholars who can give you good information, something you can rely on. Because, instead, you would run the risk of breaking your fast without a legitimate reason, or causing others to do the same. Number two, if you hear that the crescent moon has been sighted, make sure that this information is coming from two just men, and that their information of sighting the crescent moon is not contradicted by two other just men. Make sure that the information you receive is trustworthy. Number three, when the announcement of the Crescent Committee is made about the day of Eid Al-Fitr, and assuming that there are 2 days of Eid Al-Fitr, it is important that scholars respect the practices of everyone in their community, that they accommodate those who are fasting and those who are celebrating the day of Eid. We wish you all a blessed day of Eid and acceptance of all your fasts from the month of Ramadan.